Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.
Hello again, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us. A bit later in the broadcast, some personal memories, recollections of the late Congressman John Lewis from a pair of Arkansans who experienced his charm and his passion and his intellect up close. First, back to school. It won't be long. Acknowledging the reservations or opposition of pediatricians and teachers, Governor Hutchinson this week said he was resolved that on-site instruction resume beginning the week of August 24th. So, with the COVID-19 active caseload at Arkansas hovering at around the 7,000 mark, how should parents prepare their kids emotionally to return to the classroom? And for that matter, how do they prepare themselves? Well, some professional advice now from Michelle Coleman, a licensed professional counselor and clinical therapist, and Dr. Nahid Kumar, a pediatric psychiatrist and assistant professor at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. Thank you both very much for joining us on the broadcast. Doctor, if I may begin with you. I think this program likely is as much for parents or about parents as it is for youngsters, given the apprehension level among so many adults that I have come into contact with recently who have children or are about to re-enter the K-12 learning environment, or for that matter, higher education.
Right, the uncertainty level is pretty high, and as you can see, that uncertainty causes an increased level of stress, both amongst the youth as well as their parents. And we know that parents are already struggling with a lot of other stress, including losses of job, financial hardships, and this creates an additional level of burden for them to be able to take care of their kids. And they were doing this at home. And with schools restarting, a lot of parents have to make this really hard decision of whether to send their kids back to school or keep them at home.
Let me follow up, Doctor, if I may, and recognizing that your primary practice is pediatric psychiatry or seeing patients at a younger age. But there at the Med Center and perhaps in your practice, your teaching, are you seeing that level of angst among adults as well as children? Is it showing up in your contacts, your practice? Absolutely.
I mean, I have almost everyday conversations with parents where they are conflicted. A lot of parents have not made up their minds about this. And my job is to help them support either ways. Whatever decisions they make, my job is to help support them, make sure that their kids stay safe, that they stay safe, and help them navigate what they can do about that stress, about that level of uncertainty and anxiety that comes with sending their kids back to school.
Yeah, Ms. Coleman, same questions to you. The anxiety level among your younger patients and among their elders.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Dr. Kumar?
No, I was going to ask Ms. Coleman the same question to you. Are you seeing among your clients, your patients, a similar level of anxiety that Dr. Kumar mentioned?
Yes, definitely. Uncertainty always brings about anxiety. And just mainly, as you kind of said earlier, is helping the parent to cope with their own stressors and anxiety so that they can set a stable role model for the children, for them to be able to manage the uncertainty.
Are those skills, I suppose, are not necessarily innate in every adult? What's the... Go ahead. As a matter of fact, I'll take some personal advice. I've got a grandson who's about to go back to school, so go ahead anyway. What should I
think information is important. Keeping updated about what's happening with the virus, obtaining information from credible and reliable sources, and then seeking support from friends, from families, and if needed, from professionals on ways to manage that. And they can then use that information to support their children. Helping them talk about their feelings, validate their feelings that they're having regarding the pandemic, and helping them in meaningful ways through activities, through drawing, other play-based activities that help them develop a comfort level and understanding what's occurring. I think children need to understand that we're continuing to learn about the virus. And I think that is appropriate for parents to let the children know that, the information is evolving.
Dr. Kumar, Dr. Romero, the new state health secretary, has said, I think just a couple of days ago, acknowledged what scientists around the world have said, and that is, in fact, COVID-19 is a shifting target. It's a very fluid situation. That has to make the job of a counselor, a psychiatrist, psychologist, therapist, such as Ms. Coleman. It has to make your job all the more difficult, dealing with the changes in the status of this plague, this pandemic.
Exactly. And it's not just the shifting status of the virus, but it's the shifting status of protocols, policies, and a variety of other things, right? So what we have started to learn and figure out during this pandemic is nothing is stable. And of course, nothing was stable before, but even more so now, we have to be comfortable with the change. And I think that's key, where safety is paramount, both for the children and for their parents, right? And parents can do, as Ms. Coleman said, as parents can do a whole lot in calming their kids' anxieties. And one of the things is to let them be okay with the changing paradigms. Let them know that things might change. Even when they go back to school, their school schedules might change. Teachers may have to change their classroom schedules in the middle of the semester. So be ready and be prepared to deal with that change is part of the conversation that needs to happen.
Well, I think what I'm hearing from both of you professionals is that, and Dr. Kumar, we'll start with you, it's not enough, and it may even be the wrong thing to tell a youngster, don't worry about it, everything's going to be fine. The kids are as hungry for hard information, I guess, as their adults, as their parents are.
And kids are much smarter than we think they are. So yes, I would shy away from just reassuring them and telling them everything's fine and you will not be exposed. And I don't think that's the right strategy. The right strategy is telling them the facts at their developmental level, right? You talk to a 5-year-old differently than a 15-year-old. And so you have to keep the communication appropriate to their level. But yes, to tell them the facts and to tell them what's going on. And again, be ready for that change. And in fact, parents don't have to deal with this alone. There are a lot of resources on how to talk to your kids about the virus and all of the things that's going on.
Ms. Coleman, I know that you deal to no small extent with individuals. Some of your clients include individuals who are fighting substance abuse, addiction. The pressure on them, I would imagine, is even more intense during a time of pandemic.
Yes. Again, people's routines have changed. In addictions, there is a very strong peer support. So not being able to have that traditional kind of touch face-to-face, kind of starting with some of the video options, it has been difficult for, I want to say, a majority of the people that I've had that I counsel, that camaraderie, that sense, is difficult for them to obtain through video, and they have been coming in more for face-to-face sessions through telehealth.
Dr. Kumar, is it more difficult for a practitioner, as Ms. Coleman indicated, to deliver health care when it's done by, particularly psychiatric care, when it's done by Zoom or Skype as opposed to in office?
Right. What we are finding out is it's a double-edged sword in a sense, where the idea of telemedicine is to expand healthcare services, and we have been doing a lot of telemedicine. At the same time, there are patients and providers who are not very comfortable with this setting. So it really comes down to patient and provider characteristics. What I've seen in my practice, and my practice has almost entirely moved on to telemedicine using Zoom or other similar software. And what I'm finding is there are, a lot of patients do pretty well on that platform and they engage well, and you get a good sense that you're actually able to engage them in treatment. Whereas there are other patients who it seems like you are not doing very much on televideo. And so it really comes down to a patient-by-patient basis on where you feel like you're doing enough and you can do enough on televideo or telemedicine as compared to in person. So I think every provider should assess that on a case-by-case basis and figure out what kind of help they can provide.
Dr. Kumar, Ms. Coleman, great discussion. Thank you very much for bringing your insights to the broadcast. And come back soon. A titan of the civil rights movement and some Arkansas memories in a moment. And we are back. Of Congressman John Lewis of Georgia, much has been said and written, and properly so, since his death late last week. A towering figure of the civil rights movement for a half-century, he had more than a few Arkansas connections. For example, for one, he was a friend and associate of the late Wiley Bratton Sr., who spearheaded the lawsuit that desegregated Little Rock Central High and later would lead the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. Some more recent recollections now. Former Congressman Vic Snyder of Little Rock served 14 years alongside Mr. Lewis, and Maria Hoskins, who was an aide to Mr. Snyder, was for a brief time, an aide to Mr. Lewis, and she'll explain that in just a moment. Congressman, if we can, let's begin with you. For more than a decade, you were not seatmates necessarily, but you were, I guess we could say, housemates, and you came to appreciate him as in a way that few of us were able to do.
Well, he was a wonderful man. Maria has a wonderful story about how nice a man he is. I mean, I think, there's a lot of great people that aren't necessarily very nice folks, but he was just the nicest man in the world. And I actually met him before I ever started serving in office because he came and helped me in the '96 campaign. And I always felt like John kind of not took me under his wing, but kind of looked at me, with kind of affection from the very beginning. And I've decided that part of it was, and probably the most of it was, he had a very fond spot in his heart for Little Rock. And I've heard him speak, and he personally told me the story of what the Little Rock Nine meant to him as a young man. And he saw these kids about his age. I think Carlotta was younger than him. And he remembers saying to himself, because he was day after day after day in the streets of Little Rock on the news, if those kids in Little Rock can do that, what am I doing? But he gave a lot of, I think that meant a lot to him, what had happened here in Little Rock. And I think that was one of the reasons he accepted that invitation to speak at the dedication of the visitor center for the historic site across from Central High. And I think that's when Maria spent time with him, too.
Yeah, Maria Hoskins.
Hi.
Yeah, I was going to ask Maria if you could kind of recall some of those moments that you spent with the congressman. You were up close and personal there for several hours with him.
Yes, I was. It was wonderful to have the opportunity by working for Congressman Snyder to be the driver for the day. So I had the opportunity to pick up Congressman Lewis and his chief of staff, who still is chief of staff today, Michael Collins, and take them to the opening for the Central High 50th anniversary and museum opening. And just the experience of riding along with this gentleman who was truly, as Congressman said, very kind, but very insightful. The time that Congressman Lewis spends with, I believe, with anybody, because the time he spent with me, he wanted to share some of his stories. And all you could do was just to hang on to every word as he talked about the civil rights struggle and the things that he had been through, and encouraging me along the way too, to be a part of solutions, to get involved, you know. So that was very enlightening. In addition to that time, I was recalling some other times. So once a year, Congressman Benny Thompson would host a legislative Black Caucus retreat down in Mississippi. So the Black Caucus congressional delegation, most of them would travel down to Mississippi also. And at that, I remember one day in particular, I had taken my young girls with me, and he sat there for about an hour on a bench outside a conference room and just shared in some encouraging words with my daughters. And in his T-shirt and his casual slacks. I said, Congressman, don't you want to go back in? He was like, no, I want to sit out here and talk to you guys. He was that kind of person.
I remember the first time I met him in 1992. Well, actually, the first of only 2 meetings that we had. But even in that brief initial meeting in 1992, I was struck, Maria Hoskins, by how, even if he didn't say a word, there was about him a certain aura that he gave off that was pronounced. I mean, you couldn't help but be affected by it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, his saying, which I linger on today, in one of the pictures that Congressman I took, it was a cover. He was on the cover, and it said, if not us, then who? If not, well, I may get that wrong, but if not us, who? If not now, when? Something to that degree. And that still sticks with me today.
You know, we have lost just in the span of 7 days, and we got the Reverend C.T. Vivian, who, of course, was a central figure in the movement and a chief deputy to Dr. King. Lost him in the past week. Just a couple of days ago, Charles Evers down in Mississippi, and I read this morning or yesterday morning, Constance Curry in Georgia moved on, as we say. It's really is it the end of an era, Vic Snyder, or more than ever a new generation has to take command of this movement?
Yeah, well, that's the nature of life and the nature of our country and the nature of history. Time does go by. You know, there was when we were doing the debate back in 2010 on the health care bill, Charlie Rangel, who was he's a former member now, but he was in for 40 years, African American who participated in the civil rights movement, and he got up and he gave this short little speech. He said something like, you know, back when in the days of the civil rights movement, I was be on these marches and my feet would hurt and it'd be hot and I'd be thirsty and no one was noticing. And I was thinking, what are we doing out here? And he said, it's only when you look back on it that you realize you were part of history. I think Steve, you said aura. I think Congressman Lewis always knew that he was a part of history and what we were doing was a part of history. That bills would come along that may not have had the stature of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 or the Voting Rights Act of 65, but there were bills and activities that impacted the future direction of this country and the lives of African Americans and other minorities and lower income people who had not had the same opportunities. And that aura, I think, was always there was a sense of history about him, but not like looking at an old monument. It was a sense of history that something was happening with him right then. And you could see it, of course, that picture of him with his cane, the last public event down at the Black Lives Matter Avenue or whatever they're calling that in Washington. To the very end, he was a part of history, but he added to the history and the progress that this country has made. But he also always knew that we have more progress to make.
Yeah, and I think one of the most striking photographs, speaking of images, was of he and Barack Obama crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge several years ago now.
Yeah, that painting that's over my head on our wall back there over the fireplace is actually a caricature of out-of-state artist of the march over Edmund Pettus Bridge. And it's there because my wife's brother, who's now dead, was 22 years older than her and participated that day in the activities. But what I like about it, in fact, you can see it right over my hair, the man in the tan overcoat, that's John Lewis, and everybody recognizes that man in the tan overcoat. That is a historic figure and always will be.
Maria Hoskins, let me go to you and ask, as an African-American woman, are you concerned of us? Well, you just turned 30, I understand. But
Yes.
as an African-American woman, are you concerned that the generation of young people of color now who are coming on in their teen years, in their early 20s, do they have a sense of where this country has been, where it's going, the sweep of history? Are you concerned that we're losing that?
Yeah, yes, I am. I am, Steve. And for that reason itself, I'll tell you, on this year, because of so many students that I come in contact with don't know a lot about the civil rights movement and our civil in the history. So actually in March, we had in our area here in Mayflower, with picking up some kids from Conway, North Little Rock, Maumelle, et cetera. We're going to take them on a civil rights history tour. We had everything booked up, and of course, what happened? The COVID-19 hit and the museums closed. But our goal is still to do that because it's so important for students to learn that history. You know, you always hear people say, if you don't understand your history, then, you know, how can you move forward in life? You're going to repeat those things. Well, we see things repeat anyway, right? You know, from the time of Congressman Lewis and the protesting there, I heard him say on TV on one of his interviews look at what's going on today, but in such a magnitude and with such diversity. So I think it's very important that we continue to share this information.
And Vic Snyder, you're something of a student of history, I know. There is a growing concern, I think, across the nation, certainly in the academy, that we are doing a not very good job in public schools, for that matter, even in higher education, of emphasizing history, civic literacy, the humanities. Or could you share in that concern?
Yeah, I do. I have a great concern about that, and I know that I get a tremendous amount of information off the internet, and you read these national things and all, but just the local news in your own community. Walter Husband we've always been political rivals through the years, but I wish another 100,000 people would sign up for the Democrat Gazette so we could support that kind of news gathering organization. But people have to appreciate what's going on in their communities, on the water district boards or the levee boards. You know, you don't get that from going online to Huffington Post and CNN and those kinds of things. So yeah, I am concerned. Talking about the history too, one of the things that's going on now that I think is healthy for us. I mean, I'm an old guy now. I was raised, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. America's marched forward. I think it's learning that history too, but learning it more accurately. Well, yeah, there was a lot of change that came post-Civil War, but there was a lot of effort put in by governments and folks who had power to hold African Americans back in this country. And we are still seeing the vestiges of that now in a major way. So as we, learn our history, some of us are going to have to relearn our history, because what we were taught turned out to be a very incomplete picture of this country. This is still a great country. We're willing to address those kinds of things, but we have to address them. And I think in some ways we are now.
And we are simply out of time. Congressman Vic Snyder, Maria Hoskins, thank you so much for your time. And we'll be back next week.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.